We're less than a week away from the 2022 MLB Draft, and the Orioles have the number one pick. So the question is, who will they select with the top pick in this year's draft? We'll learn more about who that could be with Joe Doyle of Prospects Live coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, July 12th, 2022, and welcome back in to the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, with the Orioles off on Monday, we are focused fully on the draft. It is less than a week away. The Orioles have the number one pick, and Mike Elias continues to talk about 5 names that the Orioles are focused on. The question is, who are those 5 names? Are the 5 names we assume them to be? Are those really the guys? And at the end, we try to answer the question, who will the O's take with that number one overall pick coming up on Sunday? And to help us answer that question, back on the pod, joining us today is Joe Doyle. He is really the guy to go to for all things MLB Draft over at Prospects Live. And Joe, first of all, welcome back into the podcast. Thanks for joining us once again here 1 year later.
Yeah, hey man, thanks for having me back. I enjoyed your podcast last year and excited to get into it. I love the opening graphics there you got. You guys have definitely stepped up.
Yeah, we're on another level now.
Yeah.
But we loved having you on last year because we had you on about a week before the draft, and we did a lot of chatter about Colton Cowser. And that is who the Orioles brought into the system. We, have seen him continue to rise up the ranks now in Double-A. And after a little bit of a tough start to the minor league season this year, obviously Cowser starting to swing the bat a whole lot better. But the O's are in a different position this year, obviously, because at number 5, you feel that you can still get, a top end talent, but you don't get your entire pick of the litter. Well, that changes this year for the Orioles. And for the second time under Mike Elias, the O's will have the first pick. And everybody knows the O's were basically down to, it felt like Witt and Rutschman for a while, settled on Rutschman. And what we've seen over the last 2 months, Orioles fans pretty pleased with that pick, at least to this point. I think, and Mike Elias has said as much, there's more names in the mix at number 1 this year. So just, kind of an overview, most mock drafts, including the one at Prospects Live, has Druw Jones as that number 1 pick. But who have you heard is in that mix? Because Mike Elias keeps saying 5 players, and I think a lot of Orioles fans have 5 names in their mind. But who do you feel is in that pool? Because it's not as easy as Adley Rutschman was 3 years ago.
Yeah, no, it's not. And credit to the Orioles. They do their due diligence and they spend their money maximizing their money to the best of their ability every year. And I think that's kind of what's allowed them to put this farm system in the shape that it's in. It's one of the most impressive farm systems in Major League Baseball. But in terms of the top 5, I think Druw Jones is obviously one of the top guys there. I think Brooks Lee is definitely in that category. I think there's actually a couple other college guys in that mix. I think Kevin Parada is in the mix. I know that Adley Rutschman has been gangbusters, but when you look at this college class and you look at the competitive window that the Orioles seem to be kicking open, Parada might be the most advanced, highest upside bat in this class. And so for that reason, I think he makes some sense. Jackson Holliday certainly makes some sense. And then I would say that Termarr Johnson, I personally think the Termarr Johnson hype around the first overall pick is probably a little overblown. I don't think he's in the mix, but I do think Jacob Berry also makes some sense. So if it's not Druw Jones and Jackson Holliday, I actually think it's one of those 3 college bats that they've been connected to in the past.
Yeah, I think the only other name that we've heard at all was very early in the process was Elijah Green. It feels like that name has probably gone by the wayside in terms of number 1. And so, in your mock draft, it's Druw Jones at number 1. And, we've heard that, I had heard back in the spring that, Mike Elias was all over watching Jones and had people there at a lot of different events. And here we are again. They are obviously looking at a guy who I would say more than 50% of mock drafts at this point have Jones at that number 1 pick. So kind of in a wider question, what makes Druw Jones potentially the top player to go in this year's draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at this draft and you look at the top 7 or 8 names, every single one of those guys has an asterisk or a red flag or something on that checklist that isn't quite checked yet. When you look at Druw Jones, he kind of fits every bill, right? He performed at a high level this year. He performed in the showcases. He's still long and lean and projectable. He's going to stay up the middle of the field. He's going to play center field. He's going to play a really good center field. It's all those things that kind of add up to why why would you not take Druw Jones? There are some little nitpicky things in his swing that scouts might say, oh, this is something that we want to get fixed. But those are things that you can get fixed. Like you can't fix with Kevin Parada the fact that he might not ever be a really decorated catcher, for example. So for that reason, I just think Druw Jones is so far ahead, head and shoulders in terms of the full package in this class that not every guy can really achieve. Not really every guy can say.
And I know you guys had Jackson Holliday at number 2 in the mock draft in the most recent one, and you just mentioned him as well. And while I feel like Druw Jones, that name has been around for at least a year now, and it helps that he's Andrew Jones's son. Obviously, Jackson Holliday is Matt's son, and his name took a little bit more time to kind of reach into that number 1 conversation. But where does he differ besides the fact that you got a shortstop versus an outfielder? From Jones, if the Orioles were to go the Holliday route.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the red flags, and I don't want to just point out the things that people question about these players, but it is worth mentioning. Some of the red flags on Jackson Holliday is how long will he be able to stay at shortstop in his career? Is he speedy enough to be? Is he going to slow down as he gets into his 25, 26, 27? So listen, Jackson Holliday broke the Oklahoma State record for most home runs by a high schooler in one season. He's the son of Matt Holliday. He plays shortstop. He is built like a Greek god. I mean, he's chiseled. Jackson Holliday, if he ends up being the pick, is going to be an excellent addition to the Orioles organization. And frankly, I don't think you can go wrong with either one of those picks, especially when you view it from the lens of maybe Jackson Holliday makes more sense because he saves the Orioles a little bit of money to really splurge in that second, third, and fourth round.
So we'll get back to talking all things Orioles and the MLB draft. Number 1 overall pick, who could the O's select coming up on Sunday? But first, got to tell you about Built Bar, longtime sponsor of this podcast and the most delicious protein bar out there. And the difference with Built Bar is you're going to get 17 grams of protein. It's going to be low sugar and low carbs, and it's going to be good for you. But here's the difference between any other protein bar. A Built Bar tastes like a candy bar, covered in 100% real chocolate, hundreds of different flavors that they've come up with, and they're always adding new flavors as well. This doesn't have that usual chalky protein bar flavor. You've got these great flavors like white chocolate chunk, my favorite peanut butter brownie, fruit flavors as well, pretty much anything you can imagine. They've also got the Built Puffs, which is a protein-infused marshmallow covered in chocolate. So many different products. And if you want to get your hands on some, head over to Built.com. And when you use the promo code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off your order. Again, that is promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. We're here with Joe Doyle of Prospects Live talking about the Orioles and the upcoming MLB draft, with the O's, of course, holding the number 1 pick that they gained on the final day of the 2021 season on a Arizona Diamondbacks walk-off home run that gave the O's the number 1 pick on a tiebreaker. And that was probably the only game that Orioles fans watched of the Diamondbacks last year, but we're pretty happy with the end of it because now they pick at number 1. So we've talked about Druw Jones and we've talked about Jackson Holliday, and we brought up the names in green, and you talked about Tamar Johnson. But turning to the college players, because Mike Elias in 3 drafts has taken a college bat with his first overall pick in each of those 3 drafts, and it's still in play. So the first name I wanted to ask about is Brooks Lee, who you mentioned. He seems to be the college name that's coming up the most. Out of a smaller school in Cal Poly, went and played for his dad. And he feels like the pick where, at least among Orioles fans, I hear a lot, too safe of a pick thrown out, which isn't always the worst thing in the world. But where does Lee kind of fall into this equation?
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with the safe moniker because he's an extremely talented player that's going to be very valuable and very useful at the big league level. I think the carrying tool here is the hit. I mean, it's a guy that could potentially hit 290, 300. He can really put bat to ball. Even when the ball's out of the zone, he has a tendency to go the other way with it. So a really established hitter, and he's been doing this for a very long time. I will say he probably doesn't have the power upside of someone like Parada. I don't think Brooks Lee is ever going to be a guy that hits more than 20 home runs, 24 home runs in a season. It's just solid average power, which is very usable, especially in Baltimore with a left-handed swing. He is a switch hitter, but I think common sense would suggest he'd be hitting left-handed against right-handed pitching more often. The big question with Brooks Lee and where everyone is placing his value is how long can he play shortstop? He's had some back problems in the past. He's a bigger guy. He's pretty muscled up. I think he's 6'3", 210 pounds or something like that. Maybe 6'2", 210. So he's a pretty thick kid. I like the bat a lot. I think there's a lot of value in a guy that you can put anywhere in the lineup who can hit 290 and run into some home runs every year. I've comped him to Jorge Polanco of the Twins for quite some time. So even if that is your number one pick, you have to look at this from the frame of who are the Orioles going to take with 33 and 60 and 90 and 100. And that's kind of where the value in Brooks Lee lies. That's how the Orioles have had so much success with DL Hall and Grayson Rodriguez and so many of these later round picks. You want to continue bringing in a volume of players.
Yeah, and a lot of fans were shocked at the Heston Kjerstad pick, and of course, the follow-up hurt because nothing he could control. He gets sick, he gets injured, and is just now back on the field. Actually, congrats to Heston, gets the call up to high A today. But the Orioles were able to get Kobe Mayo because they drafted Heston Kjerstad, and Kobe Mayo has shot through the system. He's already in Double A, and fans have fallen in love with him. So going off of Brooks Lee, kind of just, do you consider him to be the best college position player in the draft? Is it Collier? I know Cam Collier is not a D1 guy that everybody's watched. Is it a Jace Young type? Is it Parada? Who is kind of that top college player?
Well, it depends on where you put your value. I tend to put my value on guys that can stay up the middle of the field and can contribute at the plate. And for that reason, I think Campbell shortstop Zach Neto and Tennessee center fielder Drew Gilbert, I think, are kind of in that next echelon of college players that are going to project to stay at the middle of the field and compete at the plate. Do I think they're the best players? No, but that's where my draft would go. In terms of where I think Baltimore should go, I would go Parada over Brooks Lee. Personally, I think Parada has the chance to be a 275 hitter that runs into 35 home runs. I think it could be a Kyle Schwarber type of a player. And while I know Kyle Schwarber with the number one overall pick isn't, Druw Jones and the Byron Buxton comparisons and things like that, I also think Kevin Parada is the guy that could be here at the very beginning of 2024 and really kick open this competitive window for the Orioles and just continue to supplement what already looks like a pretty robust prospect haul that is going to be joining Baltimore in the next 18 months.
Yeah, and I think kind of my last question that has to do with this topic, if the O's would still take a college bat, is really the question of, Adley Rutschman was, along with Bobby Witt Jr., seemed to be, one was going 1 and one was going 2 in 2019. It felt like, and it felt like the O's were definitely considering Witt and ended up falling with Rutschman. This year, it seems like there's more choices. And, how much of a difference is there in a player like Druw Jones, who I think people see the highlights and fall in love with, versus if they took a Kevin Parada or a Brooks Lee? Because I think some fans who may be listening think, oh, the Orioles are taking the 20th best player in the draft if they take Brooks Lee instead of Druw Jones. How much is that difference? We know there'll be a money difference in terms of the draft pool, but how much is that difference just in terms of the player if they were to take a guy like Lee or Kevin Parada? Remember, just because the O's have Adley Rutschman does not mean they're not going to take a guy who they think might be the best player in the draft. But how much, is that difference between a guy like Jones versus the college bats?
Yeah, I mean, I think the $1 million or $8.8 million question here is, do you believe Druw Jones is going to be a generational player? If he is going to be a healthy Byron Buxton, if he is going to, I'll throw it this way. If he is going to be an Adam Jones, if he's going to be someone that is going to go to, 6, 7, 8 all-star games, then I think the gap is pretty substantial because the value in Major League Baseball is up the middle of the field. It will always be up the middle of the field. I don't think Brooks Lee is going to be a valuable defensive shortstop, but he's going to hit the hell out of the ball. Kevin Parada is not going to be a terribly valuable defensive catcher, but he might be a guy that has a Mike Napoli type of a career, Kyle Schwarber. Wow, I'm really messing up first names. Kyle Schwarber type of a career. And so in that regard, there's more safety and immediacy in these college names, and there's more volatility in the high school names. So I guess it really just boils down to how much conviction does Mike Elias and does Sig have in terms of what this guy's ceiling is going to be, what he's going to be. If they think he's going to be a superstar, I think you take Druw Jones, because frankly, I think Druw Jones and Elijah Green are the only two players in this class that really do have superstar upside.
It's a good way to look at it as well. And we'll get back to this conversation with Joe Doyle of Prospects Live, talking about the Orioles and the upcoming MLB draft in just a second. But first, got to tell you about rockauto.com, because with all the makes and models out there of your car, it's sometimes impossible to go to a local chain auto parts store and find that exact part that you need for your car or truck. So why go to these stores, wait while someone behind the counter orders the parts on their computer or just doesn't have it in the warehouse? You have a computer, you have a phone, and you have access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. You save time and money when using Rock Auto, and it's a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. The prices are reliably low for every single customer. You don't need to be an expert. I'm certainly not, but I can still go to rockauto.com and browse all the parts, get what I need, and for the best price. They've got everything for your car: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. You can get it all at rockauto.com. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. And write Locked On Orioles in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So we're here with Joe Doyle of Prospects Live, talking about the O's. In the upcoming draft, they've got the number 1 overall pick. And Joe, I did want to ask you just a little bit about the O's at number 33, but just more of a broad Orioles sense. This is now draft number 4 for Mike Elias and crew. They have had the number 1 overall pick the first time. They gave Adley Rutschman, at that point, the biggest bonus in history to be the number 1 pick. And they took what most people believe was the best player in the draft. The next draft at number 2 in Heston Kjerstad, most people had him between 5 and 10 on their boards. They took him at number 2 and saved some money. And with Colton Cowser, maybe people had him as high as 5. It seemed like, a little more towards the bottom half of the top 10 when they drafted him last year. Just kind of as an overarching question, is there word, coming out of Baltimore camp or from what you hear from other people in the industry that, is it true that Mike Elias always wants to go under slots, or is this more of just depending on how each pool comes out, how each draft plays out, that, the Orioles aren't necessarily following a pattern every single year?
So I think the answer to that question would probably be, and I know this is not a perfect answer, but I think every team always wants to go under slot. I think every scouting director and general manager wants to save money with that first pick. Do I think it is a strict prerogative of Mike Elias in every draft? No, I think he's looking for the best bang for his buck. And I know that sounds like, he's looking to go cheap with the first pick, but I would view it this way. If you think Brooks Lee and a top 5 right-handed high school pitcher is more valuable than Druw Jones with the way that your model is built, then I don't think you question that. And I think you go with the 2 players. I do think, Druw Jones is the key to all this, because I do think anybody in the industry would agree Druw Jones is the top player in this class, or just about anybody. So if Jones positions himself to where he's willing to take $8.4 million, keep in mind, the Orioles can pay 8.8 that or more, but that's the slot value for pick number 1. Arizona's just below 8.2 with the second pick. So if Druw Jones is willing to go down to 8.4, save the Orioles $400,000 and, go to Baltimore for a shade under the full slot, I think that's enough savings to make it a slam dunk for Mike Elias. But do I think he's actively looking to go under slot with every pick? And that's like how he values, that's one of the strengths of his model. I do not think so.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because you mentioned the Arizona slot. Druw Jones can take under slot and could still get more money than potentially Arizona would be willing to pay him with the number 2
Sure.
pick, or whomever would be willing to pay him if he dropped to 3 or 4. So the Orioles, can still go under slot while still getting the best player in the draft. And, I think it's for a lot of fans, they are more paying attention to drafts in the NFL and the NBA, and the MLB draft has 100 more moving parts at any given time. So it's, you got to dive deep, and that's what we have you on to do, Joe. But the last thing I wanted to ask about is pick 33, because the Orioles are, up again 32 selections later after they take that number 1 pick. And, I know your guys' latest mock draft had it out to the Orioles' next 3 selections on the mock draft. And I know you had the O's going with a high school pitcher, which the Orioles have not taken a lot of those under Mike Elias. And I just wanted to kind of open the floor to you to throw out a couple names you think the O's are interested in / could be available around that number 33 pick, because the O's also have 42 and 67. But, at number 33, they could still get, a really, really good player at that pick.
Yeah, and the high school pitcher is what Baltimore has done well. I know that they've been first round picks in the past, but this is an extremely deep year for high school pitching. It's very robust all through the top 150 picks. Really, if you have the money for it, that's the important part, and that's why I think going under slot with that first pick and landing some of these really premium high school pitchers could really pay off down the line. There's a couple of guys that make sense. Owen Murphy, I think, is perfect. He's a high school ready out of Illinois. And he has some of the metric traits that the Orioles really seem to covet in their models. I mean, the fastball explodes at the top of the zone. He doesn't walk anybody. He's a supreme athlete who's played third base and has a ton of power in his bat. He's definitely a pitcher, but I think Owen Murphy, he's a Notre Dame commit. I don't think people expect him to be like this outlandish overslot. So I think he makes sense at 33. I do think a college pitcher out of the University of Connecticut, he's in the transfer portal right now, but Reggie Crawford, a lefty, he missed all of this season with Tommy John surgery, but up to 102 miles an hour from the left side, he was probably the best pitcher for Team USA last summer before his elbow gave out. Teams are absolutely falling in love with the makeup there. So I think Reggie Crawford makes a lot of sense. Then I'll throw one more out there just because I think he's got a shot to go pretty early. That's Jackson Cox. He is a 6'3" righty, tons of spin on the breaking ball, over 3,000 RPMs. It's said to be a pretty affordable slot option in that second round. But yeah, talking about a guy with a really quick arm, a really big breaking ball. I think he's in play anywhere in that 30 to 50 mix. And I think Baltimore is certainly in a prime position to land a guy like Jackson Cox.
Yeah, you mentioned some of these guys, and there is a good group of pitchers in this draft who have had some sort of injury or other issue in the past year, whether it be injury or the Kumar Rocker situation or suspension, and guys who may not go in the top 10, but are maybe going to be available when the Orioles pick at 33 and 42. So it'll be interesting to see if they go there. But Joe, thank you so much for joining us once again. Before we let you go, this is one of the biggest weeks of the year for you guys over at Prospects Live. So let everybody know what kind of content you guys have coming up for the draft. So, Orioles fans can tune in, because as soon as it starts, the O's are on the clock.
Yep. So we will have our last mock draft likely go live on Friday afternoon, heading into the weekend. We will also have a top 600 draft prospects update that'll go live on Thursday with just some moving parts in terms of who's moving up boards, who's moving down boards. And then on draft day, on Sunday, we will have a live thread at Prospects Live that is constantly refreshing every 10 or 15 minutes with rumors that we're hearing surrounding certain teams. Obviously, the Orioles will be a big part of that. So if you kind of want the latest in terms of industry buzz on an hour-to-hour basis leading up to that 7 o'clock draft start time, Prospects Live is going to be a good place to be.
Well, Joe, thank you so much. Orioles fans are excited to get that next top prospect into the system, with a major league team that is a little ahead of schedule right now on an 8-game winning streak, and a minor league system that is top 5 in baseball. It's becoming an exciting time. And thanks again for coming on, and hopefully getting Orioles fans even more excited for that upcoming number 1 pick.
Absolutely, man. Always fun.
So that was Joe Doyle of Prospects Live joining us once again to talk about who the O's could take at number 1 coming up on Sunday's MLB Draft here in 2022. That'll do it for today. I'll be back with you here on the pod tomorrow, recapping game 1 between the Orioles and the Cubs. We've got more trade deadline content, draft content, and much, much more coming up here on the pod. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.